don't spoil. You see, I'm Gatsby.
The Great Gatsby, regarded as the great American novel, epitomizes the jazz age of the 1920s. The Great Gatsby was published in 1925 by Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was largely inspired by the notion of achieving fame, Princeton University, his wife Zelda Sayre Fitzgerald, and alcohol. Fitzgerald's life represented the two sides of the American dream, the pleasures of alcohol, love, and wealth, and the tragedies that resulted from excess and failure. The 1920s, more commonly referred to as the Roaring Twenties, were fueled by a drastic increase in consumer spending. The recession after World War I was quickly forgotten, and the American people indulged in new products, often purchasing on credit rather than using their savings. People living in urban cities benefited the most from the new economic prosperity, much more than those living in rural areas. Those living in rural areas began migrating to cities in pursuit of better opportunities. For example, Nick Carraway, the protagonist of The Great Gatsby, moves from Minnesota to New York City in 1922 with the hope of becoming a successful bond businessman. Consumers found themselves able to buy luxury products such as cars, kitchen appliances, cameras, and radios, which were previously only purchased by the wealthy. Tom and Gatsby both boast of their high-end cars as an indication of their respective social status and wealth. Old money individuals such as Tom drove conservative automobiles, while new money individuals such as Gatsby drove flamboyant vehicles. However, at the beginning of the 1920s decade, most cars were painted in dark colors, more often than not black, due largely to the Ford influence and lack of suitable colored automobile paints. However, in 1925 and 1926, a whole spectrum of colors became available following the invention of peroxylin finishes. As such, Gatsby's iconic yellow car seems to have been implemented by Fitzgerald more for literary symbolism than for historical accuracy. Additionally, in the 2013 film adaptation of The Great Gatsby, models such as the 1929 Duesenberg, 1930 Buick, and 1933 Auburn were used. These automobiles were made after the book's original 1922 setting. The Valley of Ashes is the industrial wasteland between West Egg and New York City. The Valley of Ashes was a real place in Queens, New York, that has since become Flushing Meadows Park and was once known as the Corona Ash Dumps. The signature ashes were repurposed at the request of Robert Moses, the master builder of mid-20th century New York City, to create the base for the Van Wyck Expressway, which now runs alongside the park. Although the Valley of Ashes is a symbol for the moral and social decay that results from the uninhibited pursuit of wealth as the rich indulge themselves with regard for nothing but their own pleasure, it represents the plight of the poor. Not everyone in the 1920s lived extravagantly, and many Americans remained impoverished. In particular, African Americans and sharecroppers of the South and Midwest did not experience the prosperity of the 1920s. Gatsby takes Nick to a speakeasy in New York City. Speakeasies were hidden places where alcohol was sold. They often hosted singing and dancing to jazz music. To enter a speakeasy, one would need to say a secret password to the doorman. The prohibition was implemented through the 18th Amendment, which essentially banned alcohol. This attempt to encourage Americans to adhere to a moral code was undermined by an increase in organized crime, bootlegging, and smuggling. Legislating morality did not seem to actually increase morality within Americans. Gatsby acquires his wealth through illicit activities such as bootlegging, and is implied various times that he's involved in organized crime in major cities such as Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York City. Tom accuses Gatsby and his alleged business partner, Wolfsheim, of illegally selling alcohol in the drugstores Gatsby claims to own. Many Americans pursuing the fleeting American dream participated in get-rich-quick schemes, which often resulted in illicit activities such as gambling and bootlegging. For instance, Meyer Wolfsheim, an enigmatic gambler and acquaintance of Gatsby's, represents the corruption of individuals in society. Gatsby later tells Nick that Wolfsheim fixed the 1919 World Series. This was an allusion to the 7 Chicago White Sox players who conspired with various gamblers to lose the 1919 World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. Fashion changed immensely during the 1920s. Tom often wears dapper tailored suits, while Gatsby indulges in wearing showy suits. This represented the desire of those of new money to convey that they too were wealthy. Also, men wore hats, especially during the daytime. The 1920s saw the rise of the flappers, who were women that engaged in unconventional behavior. Women abandoned the stringent moral code of the Victorian era and strove to achieve a more boyish look, and abandoned form-fitting attire such as the corset. Evening dresses were often expensive, typically embellished with intricate beading, and paired with pearl jewelry. The 1920s saw the popularization of the crochet hat, which allowed women to mysteriously tuck away their hair. In terms of hairstyles, the bob was the most prominent and was most often sported by flappers. Various forms of entertainment increased during the 1920s. The waltz and the tango, then considered scandalous dance styles due to the need for physical proximity between a male and female, became widely popular. The jitterbug and foxtrot also garnered attention. The Lindy Hop, named for Charles Lindbergh's first solo air flight, became popular during the 1920s and included energetically swinging one's partner into the air, following a sequence of jumps. Women began to shake their torsos and do the shimmy. The Charleston is symbolic of the Jazz Age. This dance was characterized by outward kicks of one's heels and bending of one's knees, and originated on Broadway in the popular show Ziegfeld Follies. All of these various dance styles were danced to jazz music, which became a staple of the 1920s and led Fitzgerald to label the era as the Jazz Age. Fitzgerald mentions that Gilda Gray attended Gatsby's parties. Gilda Gray was one of the most famed dancers of the 1920s and was the first to dance the shimmy. Gatsby's lavish and extravagant parties convey the love Americans found for dance and the emergence of new and scandalous dance styles. Dance became a hobby enjoyed by the entire nation.
Please welcome to the stage the incredible Miss Gilda Gray.
Racism was still prevalent in the 1920s. The ideology of white supremacy continued to reign supreme, and discrimination against African Americans and other ethnicities continued. Ultimately, The Great Gatsby is quite historically accurate, although a work of fiction. It accurately conveys the sentiments of the 1920s, and Fitzgerald embellishes details in pursuit of literary symbolism. The novel is regarded as the great American novel due to its timeless themes, which continue to inspire and resonate with Americans today. Fitzgerald authored the tragedy of J. Gatsby's pursuit of the American dream with accurate historical context. The Great Gatsby is able to captivate the minds of readers today due to the combination of historical context and phenomenal storytelling.